Welcome to Love and Trauma, the real deal. Welcome to Love and Trauma, the real deal. I'm Danielle Sebastian, best-selling author, coach, and yes, I've been through the marriage trenches myself. This show is all about how to actually deal with trauma in relationships and make it work without losing your mind. If you're ready for honest talk, no fluff, and tools that cut through the noise, tune in, because let's face it, love can be a bit of a mess, but it's a mess worth figuring out. This is Love and Trauma, the real deal. If you have ever wondered what it really takes to go from survival to healing, this is the episode for you. This episode is for everyone because I really want you to hear what my guest has to say. He can put words to what trauma healing really looks like. And if you are a partner of someone who has experienced trauma, it will really help you understand what is going on behind the scenes in someone who has had significant trauma and is trying to heal from it. So let me introduce my guest today. His name is Shalev, or he goes by Lev, which is what I refer to him, Amar. And he has one of the most powerful stories I've heard. Before becoming a trauma expert, he was a top attorney. He won thousands of lemon law cases and continually leads a successful legal career. But beneath all the success was a lifetime of pain that he hadn't yet faced. Lev's grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, and that trauma didn't just end with that one generation. It rippled through his family, and it shaped the world that Lev grew up in. And then on top of that, he experienced the deep wound of being taken away from his mother as a child. So all those layers of pain, silence, and survival shaped who he became until he decided to start healing. So what followed was a 9 to 12-year journey of reading, researching, and relentlessly seeking out ways to heal the past and repair his relationships. And the discoveries he made along the way are nothing short of profound. Now, my interview was so important that I actually broke it down into 2 parts. So today is part 1, and we're really going to get into Lev's raw, powerful story and how those experiences set the stage for everything that followed. And in part 2, which will be airing next week, we're going to dive into what Lev has learned, what he has tried, which you absolutely must hear, after nearly a decade of trauma study and tools that helped him create peace and connection in his life today. So settle in. This isn't just a story about pain. It's a story about what's possible when you choose to stop running from the past and start healing it. Let's dive in. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited for our conversation.
Glad to be here. I'm excited too.
Well, you've had a really successful career in law, but over the last 9 years, you've dedicated yourself to studying trauma healing. Can you share what pulled you into this world of trauma work for us?
Sure. It's actually been longer than 9 years at this point. Time flies. We're at 12 years.
Okay.
Basically, it was hitting bottom. I was in a very dysfunctional relationship, which triggered a lot of my childhood trauma. And, the first year was good. The last 3 years were varying degrees of hell. A lot of disrespect, a lot of arguing, yelling, belittling, being humiliated in front of family and friends, and tried really hard to make it work. When I first met her, I thought we'd get married, and it was amazing at first. Now I realize there was a lot of love bombing and idealization and halo effect type stuff. But in any event, after the first year, and there were some red flags, which of course I disregarded, But after the first year, it just got really bad. And I grew up with a father who had a severe case of BPD. He was traumatized. My grandfather was a Holocaust survivor and a raging alcoholic. And my dad has since passed away. I don't want to bash my father. Hurt people hurt people. He had a good heart. He just could not deal with his anger and trauma issues. And my mom called him a rageaholic. He's basically
Mm,
like a dry drunk. He had all of the characteristics of a raging alcoholic without actually drinking, because he modeled the behaviors that he grew up with. Um, my father taught me work ethic, integrity, honesty. He was a good person, but that's the sinister thing about trauma is it can cause even good people to sometimes do terrible things to the people they care about and love the most. So, anyways, long story short, because I tend to go on tangents. So we broke up several times the last year of the relationship, and then finally I just realized that there's no way it was going to work because it would be better for a couple of weeks and I would go back to the same patterns. And so we had a final breakup, and I took breakups really, really hard because it triggered my deepest emotional wounding. For a long time, I thought it was my father's emotionally abusive behavior, but I had an even deeper emotional wound, which was an abandonment issue caused by being taken away from my parents at a year old. And I was brought up in what they call children's houses. It was in, I, just to give a little bit of context, I was brought up in what's called a kibbutz. It's basically kind of like a farming commune in Israel. And so they had weird social experiments. And one of those was taking the kids away from the parents at a year old. It was to help the parents be able to sleep through the night and to work more and have lives. And they thought that it would build community cohesion. It was just a small village of like 300 people. And so they wanted the kids to be like siblings. And it did cause that effect, but they didn't understand anything about attachment.
mm,
And so obviously taking a baby, an infant, away from their parents at a year old had major deleterious effects. It's basically like the same as kids who grow up in orphanages. And so my earliest memory is I don't know how old I was, maybe 2 or 3 years old, but I woke up in the middle of the night in one of the children's houses, and the parents would rotate watching us, but they would fall asleep because it's the middle of the night. So I'd wake up, freak out, try to get home. And apparently it was a big problem. Like I only have one memory, but apparently it happened dozens of times that I would, in the middle of the night, be walking through the village crying, trying to get home. And that was a deep, deep-seated trauma. So breakups would trigger that abandonment wound for me. So it was just horrible. I'd have difficulty breathing all day, panic attacks, um, insomnia, wake up in puddles of sweat. I mean, it was brutal. And at the time, I would think it was like, well, it's because I'm so in love and I don't want to lose this person. And it wasn't that. It was just triggering my deepest emotional wounding and trauma. That's why I was having that horrible reaction. So hitting that bottom, I just got to an enough is enough point. I said I just couldn't keep living this way anymore. And I just realized that, I had to kind of go on that hero's journey that I'd been resisting for many years, um, to to heal.
oh, love. Wow. That's a lot. Yeah. And so you hit this rock bottom in your relationship, and we may come back to, what some of those red flags were, but I'm sure that having some of your abandonment issues led you to stay in relationships that
Oh,
weren't
yeah.
serving you as well. But did you know at that time, at that rock bottom, that it might be the way that you grew up that you needed to heal? Or did you just know I need to do something different?
I didn't know. That's the thing. When you go on the healing path, you figure out things over time. It's kind of like peeling layers of the onion because when I started on the healing path, I worked really hard on um, processing and releasing the trauma related to my father. And I was able to successfully do that. I was even able to forgive. Um, but then there was still just this deep anxiety and uneasiness. And I was like, where's this coming from? And that's when, through the process of doing the work, I realized, oh, wow, it was this other thing. Because,
Yeah.
part of my journey was I realized that okay, I know how to be a lawyer. I'm smart. I understand politics well and world events and history and but but as far as relationships and psychology and emotional health, you know,
Not so much, huh?
no, but like there I was very deficient in my knowledge. So I was just like, okay, I got to put my ego and pride to the side and let's just learn something. I grew up in a dysfunctional environment. My parents they fought like cats and dogs. Um, my dad was actually even worse to my mom than he was to me. He would just fly off into rage attacks against her, even in family events. That gave me major social anxiety because it was always like, okay, what's going to cause my dad to flip out on my mom in front of everybody? And it was super embarrassing.
Yeah.
I remember,
Events are bad. Events are
yeah.
bad, right? Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I think um, men in particular, like you got to go on the healing journey. You don't want to bleed on people who didn't cut you. And not just that, you're damaging your children if you have children. It's not about just damaging your romantic relationship. But because my dad would yell at my mom at family dinners or social functions, and I remember people would like look at my sister and I, and we just basically wanted to crawl under the table. We were just so embarrassed and humiliated. Um, but yeah, in going through that journey, I did realize that there were multiple sources of trauma. And trauma is complicated. I think the common misconception out there is you're only traumatized if there's like a huge traumatic event, like you witness your best friend being blown up in a war, or you're assaulted, or you're robbed or at gunpoint or something like that. That's one source of trauma, but the majority of trauma is actually more complex. Um, there's regular. I mean, the symptoms are similar, but there's typical PTSD from again being in a war or being a policeman who sees horrible things like murders or even God forbid as being raped or something like that. But there's also complex PTSD. That's more from and I believe there's more. I haven't done a double-blind placebo-controlled study, but I believe there's more complex PTSD out there than people realize, and that's more from wounding in childhood. It could be emotional abuse, neglect, physical abuse, molestation that's repeated over time. And I would say the main distinction between regular PTSD and complex PTSD, although the symptoms are very similar, um, as far as high levels of anxiety, difficult breathing, panic attacks, emotional outbursts, stuff like that. But I would say with complex PTSD, there's also a higher level of emotional dysregulation.
Yes.
You feel like you have a crazy clown car in your brain and you just cannot control your emotions at all, which is an additional like difficult aspect of it.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of triggering and things like that.
It's interesting that you say that because I think just even just I call it like a chaotic home. Growing up in a chaotic home,
Yeah.
right? Can be can be very can cause those CPTSD symptoms. And then I just had an interview with someone where they fostered brand new babies. from the NICU. They fostered, and the it starts even in the womb.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
That's one of the things that
yeah.
I've learned about trauma and that other people don't realize. I think oftentimes you can have somebody in adulthood who has severe anxiety, or depression, and anxiety and depression tend to be interrelated. It's like cycles of anxiety and depression, and you go back and forth between being anxious and depressed, or you're anxious and depressed at the same time, ironically.
Hmm.
But yeah, it can even start in utero.
Yeah.
In my situation, my parents were fighting when I was in utero. So my mom was extremely stressed out, and that affected me. Traumatic birth can
Yep.
traumatize. My mom went through a nearly 48-hour labor. And so the whole time I was stuck in the birth canal, I'm getting flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, which can lead to your nervous system being overactive from a very young age and
Yeah.
hypersensitive. Um, then they also took me away from my mom after I was born, I think for like 24 hours. So like nobody held me or anything. And again, that's something where you don't remember it, but your subconscious remembers it, and it
Yes.
causes like this deep unease and just feeling of being totally ungrounded and unmoored.
Yeah. So did you start, so when you hit rock bottom, did you start studying trauma like as deeply as you did law? Did you start there? Or what were your first steps towards
Well,
doing a different
ironically, I
thing?
didn't even start with the trauma stuff. I wanted to understand relationships better,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
because I just didn't ever want to go through that type of situation again. Like I said, it was hell. And and so it was in studying relationships, I started to then find out about trauma, and then I started studying psychology as well. I went to numerous seminars and workshops, and I did start to see a pattern. Oh wow, a lot of this is related to your childhood and your past painful experiences. Trauma is basically an unhealed emotional wound. It's like a psychic wounding. And so it's and time doesn't heal wounds. It just doesn't. Not deep wounds. Minor stuff, yeah, but not deep emotional wounding, especially if it's repeated. What you have to do is process and release. It took me a long time to figure it out. You can't, awareness is important. It's a foundational element of healing, but awareness in and of itself is not enough because emotions are more powerful than logic. That's how we're designed, and it's to survive. And the issue is, so basically with trauma, you're basically trapped in fight, flight, or freeze. And especially as a young child, you might have to be on guard not to set the parent off to kind of be walking on eggshells. And that's what you needed to survive at the time, but it's maladaptive in adulthood. And so you're basically trapped in that cycle of fight, flight, or freeze. And really, the only way to get out of that cycle is to process the emotional wounding that's causing that. I like to use metaphors because that really
Mm.
helps people understand things better.
Mm.
And so the way I look at trauma is imagine you had like a big thorn stuck in your arm. Now, the way that unfortunately society has dealt with trauma is okay, put some numbing cream on it, or think positive about the thorn being in there. Try and distract yourself. No amount of numbing cream, no amount of medication will ever get rid of the throbbing from the thorn. The only thing that will stop the throbbing is to pull the thorn out completely, but it hurts to pull it out. And that's why, unfortunately, a lot of people stay trapped in trauma their entire lives because they don't want to face it. The only way out is through. You can't distract yourself from this problem. You have to pull out the thorn, Ironically, by pulling out the thorn, it's more painful to pull it out in the short term, but in the long term, that's what you
Mhm.
need to do to heal.
Yeah, I can agree with you. Very much on that, love, because when my husband started his trauma healing, I was under the understanding that I was like, oh, good, we've identified that thing. We just need to do a year of counseling or whatever, and we're going to be golden. And I found that that is not the case. That often things get worse, before you get better during that because of how hard it is to go there and release those things that
Definitely. And
happened.
it's also kind of a two steps forward, one step back
Yes.
process. And that can be
Yes.
very frustrating too. And sometimes people give up as they're making progress because they make progress and then they have a setback by new things being surfaced or a life challenge coming up that triggers some of the past pain. But that's part of the process. That's normal. It's not like a straight trajectory upwards. It's kind of like the stock market. It's like up and down, but slowly over time, it's an upward trajectory if you don't quit.
Yes. Indeed. It's so funny because I have a whole depiction for that
Mhm.
where it's like this up, but you're right. Ultimately, each low isn't as low as it was
Yes.
when you first started.
But
Yes.
it feels frustrating
It
because
really
you feel
feels
like you've
frustrating.
turned the corner and then you have this setback and like all, the difficulty breathing, like some of the symptoms, like the difficulty breathing or insomnia or emotional lack of emotional control, dysregulation start coming back. And you're like, what's going on? I thought I'd gone past
I've
this and
gotten
I'm
through
starting to feel
this.
this again. And so,
Yes.
then they're like, oh, well, whatever. I'm just going to try and numb it with drinking or drugs or shopping or sex or gambling. Like so many vices these days are pursued to basically self-medicate for pain instead of dealing with the pain, to try and just self-medicate for pain, to numb the pain, to distract from the pain. But back to that metaphor, it's not pulling the thorn out.
No. So in your research, because I'm going to be honest, I had trouble getting good research that showed how this CPTSD in particular affects relationships. What did you find?
Banging your head against the wall trying to navigate the complexities of a relationship impacted by childhood trauma, it doesn't have to be this daunting. When you're married to a partner with unresolved childhood trauma, it can feel like you're walking on eggshells, never quite knowing what will set them off. No matter what you try, it feels like there's always something triggering another emotional response that seems completely out of context. And the harder you try to fix it, the more discouraged you feel. So what's the issue here? Navigating marriage with a trauma survivor is different. The love languages don't work. Date nights don't work. Self-help books don't help. But here's the good news. I've created something that does work. Something built from years of hard-earned lessons and real-life experience. Ready to take the first step toward real change? Let's talk. I'm offering a free one-on-one call where we'll dive into what's going on in your relationship and figure out a way forward together. This isn't just another quick chat. It's a chance to finally be heard, to share what you're going through with someone who truly gets it. No judgment, just real support. So if you're ready to start making sense of it all and find a little more peace in your marriage, book your free call now. Your happiness, your peace, and your relationship are worth it. Let's do it together.
Oh, it deeply affects relationships
Yeah.
because when somebody is filled with trauma and dysregulation, they are very easily triggered. So oftentimes something that's a neutral conversation or just a minor discussion or feedback can lead to an explosion in someone who has not dealt with their trauma. Something that can even turn into a joke turns into a huge argument. And I remember with my father in particular, um, by the way, as an aside, I think there's two main ways that people behave when they're severely traumatized.
Mhm.
They can either lash out, three ways actually, now that I think about it.
Mhm.
They either lash out, they're aggressive, which is kind of the fight response, or they would withdraw, which is kind of the flight response. And then there can be a mix where there's with the like what I would do, the unhealthy dynamic that I was in with my ex is I would just withdraw. I would dissociate, and that would tick off my ex even more. And we went through this just terrible pattern of she would say nasty things to me, she would be disrespectful to me, and she would yell at me at random. And look, it always takes two to tango. I'm not obviously not going to say who it is to protect her privacy. But in fairness, I wasn't the best partner. I was very dissociated. I didn't even know at the time that that was a trauma response. She used to joke that I'm a space cadet, because I was totally dissociated half the time. And I,
It's like a flip is switched,
yeah, she would
isn't
say
it?
something and I wouldn't even register.
And just blankness.
Correct. And but the dissociation would get worse if she lashed out at me at
Yes.
all.
And
And
sometimes the partner's just trying to get, I mean, doing anything to try and get a response.
that's right. And
It's a
oftentimes
terrible
it's an
cycle.
unhealthy, yeah, it's an unhealthy
Yes.
dynamic where then you withdraw and then they become even more aggressive and then you
Yeah.
withdraw even more.
Yeah.
Um, and the reason for dissociation is especially when you're dealing with childhood abuse, the child can't escape the situation, so it's the brain just basically goes offline. It's a self-preservation mechanism, and you just totally dissociate, because it's so painful to deal with what you're being exposed to in the moment. And the problem is it's just a subconscious response, basically a freeze response, because
Yep.
typically you have fight, flight, or freeze. So what would happen is I would either, flight, try and get away from her, or freeze, like completely dissociate, which is a combination of flight and freeze. And it would just keep going and going and going. And then after about 3 or 4 months, I would just explode.
Yeah.
I was never physically abusive. I would never raise a hand to a woman, but I would just blow up and just scream at her, and then she'd start crying, and it was a very unhealthy dynamic where then it would be better, or then we'd talk it out and it would be better, for a couple of weeks or even a month, but then the same pattern would repeat. And I was consistently, that is, biting my tongue, not being assertive, not setting any kind of boundary, because I didn't want to get in a fight. I didn't want the
You were
conflict.
avoiding,
Yeah, I was being
avoiding.
avoidant,
Yeah.
instead of addressing the issues. But inside, I was
It's just
getting like,
pent up,
yeah, I was
ready
getting
to
like,
blow.
yeah, and I was getting like spikes of anxiety and spikes of anger, and I was just suppressing and suppressing and holding it in and holding it in, and then eventually it would lead to an explosion. But that's a very unhealthy way to deal with things, but it's what I grew up with,
Yeah.
because on my father's side, I saw explosion. On my mother's side, I saw just dissociation and withdrawing and flight. So that was the modeling that I had growing up. You can't
Do
just
you
have a
think
dis
that,
go ahead.
yeah, so do you think that sometimes even the dissociation or withdraw is also, I also felt that some of it was trying to be protective of me
Yeah.
because my husband was afraid that he was gonna yell and stuff and he didn't want to, right?
That's
And so
exactly.
part of it was that too.
Yeah, I didn't want to be that way.
No.
Growing up, my grandmother on my mom's side would always be like, "Don't you be abusive like your father," blah blah blah.
Right.
And, to say that to a kid is not great either. So I would just
No.
try so hard, not to raise my voice ever, to just try and get along, to suppress my feelings. But it's much better to be, and you don't have to yell to do this, but to be genuine and be vulnerable and be like, when you said that to me, that hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
And that might have not been your intent, but because of my childhood, because of X, Y, and Z reasons, that was very triggering for me. Can you please be aware of that? Um, but part of the problem was the partner that I had. Both people
Yeah.
need to be willing to grow.
Yeah.
And there was a level of narcissism there. And I don't, I know these days the common thing is to say everybody's a narcissist. I think it's kind of a spectrum as far as narcissism. Like we all can have narcissistic traits. It's just a matter of degree. But I just felt like she had kind of a high level of narcissism because her attitude when I would say those things is like, well, I'm just expressing myself and women are emotional and I lash out sometimes. I'm just being emotional. Stop taking it so personally. It's got nothing to do with you. But it's like, well, I do take it personally because I was yelled at my whole childhood and it triggers that. And it's
Right.
like,
Right.
and I don't want to be talked to that way. I want to feel supported and I want kindness and respect. Um, so part of the thing is yeah, you were mentioning earlier that to avoid abandonment, you stay in just terrible
Yeah.
relationship situations, and that's what it was. Like
Yeah.
I was tolerating. Well, there were multiple reasons. I grew up in a chaotic environment, so even though I didn't like it consciously, subconsciously it felt normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Even sometimes
that's right.
safer. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just
Right.
I
Yeah.
understood it on a
You
deep
understood that better than
any other type of.
easy communication, right? Like actually communicating
That's right.
was
And
scary.
secondly, yeah, I didn't want to be
Yeah.
abandoned. I didn't want to be
No.
alone. And so
Yeah.
I look back and I just think now, I mean, after that relationship, especially after I'd done some work, I had one situation in particular where a woman I was dating just said something really nasty to me. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I want to be too specific, but what the heck.
Mm.
Um, I had picked her up from some kind of party she was at with a friend of mine who was too drunk to drive. And so I picked them up and they were like, oh, let's go to a strip club. And that's not my thing, but they were drunk and I was like, okay, whatever. And then so we were at a strip club and I guess one of the strippers like kind of flirted with me in front of her. And then she after the stripper left, she's like, she wasn't saying it jokingly, or else I would have just laughed it off, but she was like
Mhm.
something like, "You're just a male slut," and just said it like in a really nasty way.
Mm.
And I was like, what did you say to me? You know what I mean? Like, this is not
Mm.
okay. And she's like, yeah, that's what you are. You're just a man or something like that. And so I took them home. I was like, okay, well, I'm taking you home now. Um, to her credit, she called me the next day and apologized, and I accepted the apology, but I'd kind of seen this story before. And to me, if you're willing to say a certain thing to somebody, not just the content of what you're saying, but the nasty tonality, like dehumanizing and very disrespectful, like I'd seen that story before. And I
Yeah.
wasn't going to ignore that red flag again. So I said, thank you for
Yeah.
apologizing. Like I appreciate that, but I don't want to take this any further because it just showed me what she was capable of. And I think a lot of times, especially in the honeymoon phase, the infatuation, there's biochemical things going on that make us delusional. We ignore red flags like that. We're like, oh, anybody can have a bad day. Um, but there's certain things that you should never ever say to somebody that you supposedly care about and are in love with. There's just certain places that, to me, it's like a verbal assault. And you don't just have to hit somebody to deeply hurt them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's certain things you should never ever say to somebody unless you're willing to risk the relationship.
Yeah. And I mean, you got to this point where you were like, I'm going to pay attention to the red flags. If it doesn't feel right for me,
Yeah.
then
Your inner
yeah,
knowing, you
yeah,
can't ignore that. As a
yeah,
practical matter, you know that feeling you get in your solar plexus that like it's kind of a tightness and kind of a pain feeling? When
yeah.
you ignore that, 100% of the time I can say that, both in relationships, business, when you ignore that, things really blow up in your face. And so
Yeah.
I've learned the hard way, never ever ignore that. Never. It's like
Yes.
you have to listen to that inner knowing. And you can't rationalize it away. If you do, you're cruising for a bruising.
Yes. At least don't do it the second time, right? Like
Yeah.
if you did one the first time, then go with the second time. Well, I am so curious. We need to get deep into, okay, you identified
Mhm.
that, that you needed to work with your triggers,
Yes.
right? Essentially, if you wanted to be in a healthier relationship. And so how did you do that? It's hard.
It's very hard. Just basically through trial and error. I was
Okay.
banging my head against the wall for years.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm actually working on a book to help people on the trauma healing journey, to give them some guidance that I wish I had.
Mhm.
And just by the way, I mean, I'm still working on it. I I hope to have the book released next year. It's gonna, just so your audience knows, it's called Overcome. And the missing piece that I saw, you reach a certain point where, again, knowledge is valuable. I'm not going to say that it isn't. But when it comes to trauma, it gets to a point where you have to actually take action to process and release it. And I realized that although understanding was helpful, I still had that emotional pain internally. So I had to do things to process and release it. And it was just through a process of trial and error and iteration, going to lots of, like I said, lots of seminars. I also watched, gosh, thousands of hours of YouTube videos and podcasts. And I was able to just start to piece things together.
Okay.
And then I just realized, okay, that's what's missing. I need to actually process and release this stuff. Um, like I understand the source, I understand the effects, and now I have to like go through the work of like physically getting this out of my body. And so I just started to try different processes, uh, different treatments, different healing methods. And again, a lot of trial and error involved.
Mhm.
But I did find things that worked eventually.
All right, that's a wrap for today on Love and Trauma, the real deal. Big thanks to my guests for sharing their insights. Couldn't have done it. All right, that's a wrap for today on Love and Trauma, the real deal. Big thanks to my guests for sharing their insights. Couldn't have done it without you. Now, for those of you looking to take this journey further, I've got something special. Head to my website to grab Real Tactics, Real Healing, a survivor's playbook for navigating a relationship with a trauma survivor. It's packed with everything you need to know, do, and say to navigate the emotional minefield, find your balance, and regain your self-worth and happiness.